Rogelio, it looks like you're muted if you want to unmute quickly.
Hello, everyone. Thank you so much for joining for this webinar on Goal 4.7, Sustainable Education Post-COVID. It is a pleasure to be here with you today. Well, I hope that you all enjoy and learn a lot on this webinar that will be imparted by Professor Jeffrey Sachs. This webinar is hosted by SDSN Global with the network chapter of SDSN Mexico. So now, please, Ambassador Miguel Ruiz Cabañas, could you please tell us some words?
With pleasure, Rogelio. Good afternoon, everyone. I'm very, very happy to be participant in this webinar organized by very energetic young people. Congratulations to SDSN Mexico and SDSN Youth Global. It is a great honor to have you here, Jeff, after we had a meeting a few weeks ago on the Executive Council of our network. And I really think that your presentations are always very, very inspiring. So we are all very anxious to listen to your words on the two subjects that today are closely linked: sustainable development promotion education, and the post-COVID, hopefully post-COVID societies that we want to live, we all want to be living in very soon. At the same time, I was wondering if you can share your thoughts on three very specific issues that I want to raise. One is, how do you see the possibilities of having a quick international economic recovery? I mean, how likely is this going to happen or not? Second, how do you see international geopolitics game is changing? How do you see the rise of China vis-a-vis the United States and this very, very hard discussion they are having with the World Health Organization? And finally, how do you see us, people working at the universities, research centers, professors, students, researchers? We all belong to universities, research institutions that belong to the network that you are the founder and the main force behind it. So we really would like to know, how do you see the road, coming months? How do you see the role of the young people, the young students? How do you see their future? I think they are very, very interested in listening to your words on these coming months and years. Thank you. Thank you for being here, Jeff.
Thanks to you, Ambassador. Thanks for the partnership. Rogelio, thank you for the SDSN Youth and SDSN Mexico organizing this get-together. I'm delighted to see that there are so many participants joining the discussion, and it's very gratifying because we're all trying to find solutions right now.
Jeff, I'm sorry to interrupt you, but my colleague, Jose Manuel Saniger from UNAM, is supposed to say just a few words.
Of course, I'm sorry.
I'm sorry, but Jose Manuel, now you have the word. And I'm sorry for interrupting you. It's very quick.
No problem at all. I jumped the gun.
Thank you.
Okay. Hello, everyone. Thank you for staying today with us. Dear Jeffrey, dear Professor Sachs, we are really delighted with your global initiative promoting the SDG 4, inclusive and equitable quality education. And we are even more delighted because this global initiative starts with the SDSN Mexican Youth Chapter. Thank you very much for your presence among us. We want you to feel very, very welcome to this, your home and your Mexican academic community. We also guess you can visit us in person soon, and it will be a very happy day for so many good reasons. That's all. Thank you, Jeffrey. We are waiting for your wise words. Thank you.
Thank you for those lovely words, and thanks to all of you for getting us together. Oh, I wish this were easier, happier times, and that we were, addressing some of the future problems, but we're really in the midst of a battle that we didn't expect to have a half a year ago, that we're not winning right now. And that is a very dramatic and dire battle. But it relates closely to the core purpose of SDSN, which is to bring knowledge to public affairs, to problem solving, to make politics the art of solving our shared problems, not simply the fight of power. This is really, I think, the core idea. My inspiration comes from the ancient Greek philosophers, especially Aristotle. He wrote the first Western textbook on politics called The Politics. And Aristotle's idea was that politics is the art of creating well-being in society. The Greeks used the term eudaimonia, meaning happiness or thriving. And Aristotle's idea was that the city-state, the polis, or the political community, was there precisely to promote the eudaimonia, or the happiness of the people. Well, I can tell you our politics are not promoting much happiness these days. In the United States, the only thing Donald Trump promotes is hatred and division, because not only personally is he a despicable man, by the way, but our politics became not the Aristotle's view of solving our problems. It became just a fight for power. And so now we have two parties that just fight for power. I believe the Democrats are better than the Republicans, and the Republicans follow this crazy man, Trump, who is absolutely despicable. But the truth is, we don't have a good discussion in the United States of how to solve our well-being. We can't stop the epidemic because we don't have logic, rationality, decency, attention to details. We just have name throwing. Of course, the problem starts in particular with the president, because in our systems, presidents are very powerful. And in the United States, Trump governs by executive decree. He's almost a dictator in between elections now, because he uses decrees rather than legislation to govern. And since he's so incompetent, the decrees are mainly decrees of hate or political manipulation rather than problem solving. Let me start with a few words about the epidemic itself, because they're very important for Mexico as well as for the United States. Indeed, the Americas, North and South America, are in a very bad situation because of this virus. So this virus, as you know, is a virus that humanity has not experienced before. It is a virus that presumably started in the bat population. It looks that it infected some mammals, maybe a mammal called the pangolin. It's a mammal in East Asia. And maybe it was transferred from that mammal to human beings sometime late last year. And probably in China. And then from China, it spread to Europe by jet travel. So it took just a few days. And then it took a few days of Europeans traveling to the United States. And then people from the United States traveling to Mexico, to Brazil, and elsewhere. Within a short period of time, COVID-19 was everywhere. It's a very infectious disease. It's easily spread. It's spread through personal direct contact between individuals just by talking or breathing on each other or being in close proximity. And the interval from one infection to the next infection is only a few days. Somebody gets infected, and then a few days later, they're infectious, and then they infect the next person. And because it's so easily transmitted, and because you develop the infectiousness very fast, the time for the number of infected people to double and then double again and then double again is only a few days. So if the infection has reached Mexico or reached the United States and the government isn't paying attention, within a month, there will be thousands or tens of thousands of infected people. And if you don't have good control through public health, the infection will overrun the society. And this is what is happening in the United States, in Mexico, and in a lot of other countries in the world. The first places that got badly infected were the places with direct travel to China. So this was especially Madrid, Rome, Paris, and those countries got very hard hit. But Europeans were moving a lot in this period. They were going skiing together in the Alps. And so the disease spread to the rest of Western Europe very fast. It turns out some people came from China to the west coast of the United States in mid-January, and that started one part of our infection. And then the scientists tell us that the infections that we've had in New York and in the east coast of the United States came from Europe, actually, just by checking the genetic code. Because of the mutations, you can track the virus around the world. And the east coast of the United States was infected by people coming from Europe, in fact. In my city, New York City, they weren't paying attention. They weren't measuring. Our federal government completely failed. And so the cases multiplied until there were tens of thousands of cases in mid-March. And New York has suffered 20,000 deaths. Just a horrendous, terrible outcome. Just the city of New York, and the US as a whole, more than 100,000 deaths. It's sad and important to understand what went wrong. In the United States, we have a president who is, he's a nut, to use the just the vernacular word. He's nasty, ignorant, and a narcissist. I'm not saying it for political reasons. I'm describing how you get 100,000 deaths in a country in short order because the government is completely incompetent. I wish I could say that your president in Mexico is on the case, but he's not. You know, for a long time, he said, don't worry about it. Go to events, go to sports, hug people, and so on. Of course, many politicians around Mexico knew better, that this is very dangerous. This is going to kill a lot of people. But unfortunately, in our presidential systems, we're so much dependent on what one person thinks. And I don't think Mexico has this virus under control. And if you look around the Americas, we have another president, Bolsonaro in Brazil, who basically acts like Donald Trump. He's arrogant, ignorant, nasty. And he also said, oh, don't worry about it. And now Brazil is absolutely in the midst of complete disaster. Right now, Brazil's deaths, I'm just looking at the most latest number, 26,000 deaths recorded in Brazil, one of the extraordinarily high death totals in the world. And this is, again, a failure of leadership. There are crises in Ecuador, in Peru. It's spreading throughout the Americas. The Americas is getting pummeled by this. It's interesting and important to realize that there are parts of the world where this epidemic is actually being controlled. And this is mainly in the Asia-Pacific region. So after the outbreak started in China, you know, China took dramatic actions to first quarantine a whole city, Wuhan, and then basically to start this lockdown idea. And China was so rigorous about it and tracked all the cases, tested people, checked every place there could be an outbreak, that they brought the virus infections down to almost nothing by April, and the deaths down to almost nothing. And now whenever there's an outbreak in China, because there still are sporadic outbreaks, they control them by public health officials monitoring every case, testing the people, putting them into quarantine, finding out who they were in contact with, testing those people, and doing what is called testing, tracing, and isolating of infected people. And that produces control of the epidemic. And you don't have to be, you know, every kind of government can do this if the leadership knows and understands what to do. So I would say by and large, Korea has contained the epidemic. Japan has contained the epidemic. Taiwan has contained the epidemic. Hong Kong has contained the epidemic. Australia has contained the epidemic. New Zealand has contained the epidemic. Vietnam has contained the epidemic. And that's very promising for Mexico or the United States or Brazil. It shows this can really be accomplished. And it's a matter of rigorous public health. And Mexico has some outstanding public health leaders and a National Institutes of Public Health, which is really an outstanding institution. But the president has to want to listen and to learn. And the governors need to understand they have to be absolutely rigorous in controlling the epidemic. So the world is really divided in how this epidemic is hitting right now. Some places very successful, other places rather disastrous, and I'm afraid the Americas overall disaster right now. The US, Mexico, Brazil, Peru, Ecuador, maybe that's the worst, but it's spreading everywhere. And there are very few places in the Americas that really have this decisively under control right now. So this is my first message. We're not going to have an economic recovery until this epidemic is controlled. It's a little weird. Our stock market is rising right now. It's even higher than it was a year ago. And the central bank, the Federal Reserve, is printing a lot of money. And a lot of big businesses are able to get cheap credits and thereby survive. But we also have lost 25 million jobs in the United States, roughly 20%, I would say, of the employment. Maybe it's 30 million at this point. We are in depression territory in terms of job loss. And I don't believe we're going to have a recovery until we have a control of the epidemic. And Trump will not control the epidemic. So things have been left to the governors of our country and the mayors. And it's very, very hard to have a foolish national government, even if you're smart state and local government. If the federal government isn't working, it's tough. And that's the American situation right now. So I believe that we are really in a deep crisis that's going to last a long time in the United States. And all these financial indicators that say, oh, quick recovery. I don't think it's going to happen. And I also don't believe that it is likely at all that it's possible to have a vaccine in a short period of time. Even if we did have a vaccine developed, you'd have to spend a year to know that it's safe before putting it into millions and millions of people, because the adverse effects and adverse reactions can't be known beforehand. They have to be studied before it's deployed. So I don't think we're going to have a vaccine anytime soon. And I'm worried, by the way, that the recent news of a vaccine was mostly propaganda for Trump, and even financial fraud, maybe, by some of the companies, because they said, oh, we're great, we've got a vaccine. Their share price went up enormously. And then it turns out that the CEO of one of these companies was secretly selling his shares, even as he was talking about the miracles of what his company was going to accomplish. So there could have been insider trading and even financial fraud. This is to be seen. I'm not claiming it. I'm just saying there's some very suspicious behavior that we have to look into. But the bottom line is we're not going to have a vaccine anytime soon. So the only way to really control the epidemic is through public health. Testing, tracing, quarantining, safe workplace practices, physical distancing, taking it very seriously. This is what needs to be done. So, all of this means that we're in a deep crisis. And because of Trump, he makes the crisis worse by exacerbating it by trying to blame everyone else. So the latest US politics is to say it's China's fault. This is basically propaganda. You know, it's not fault of a country when an epidemic breaks out. And H1N1 in 2009 broke out in Mexico and then came to the US. We don't say it's Mexico's fault. We say that this is the vulnerability of humanity. And then it's our responsibility to cooperate to address the crisis. But Trump is trying to blame China, also claiming that China covered up the epidemic and so forth. I also do not believe this. And I think what the US is saying is more propaganda. But it addresses the second question: what is the geopolitics of this? Right now, it's not cooperative, basically because the United States is trying to make it non-cooperative. It's trying to make a fight out of it, partly to deflect blame, and partly because the US mentality is always to attack a rival. And so China's become a rival of the United States. And the US mentality is there's not enough place on the planet for the both of us. Either you do what we say or you're an enemy. And that is really what US foreign policy is about right now, is trying to make China an enemy. So I'm not happy about the geopolitics at all. I'm not content about it. And I'm, in fact, very concerned about the attack of the US on China, because I think it is a political game, not a real solution to anything. And that brings me to the third of your excellent questions. What is our role? What is our role as universities? How do we face this? How does that relate to SDG 4.7? The whole theory of the SDSN is we need knowledge in politics, not hate politics, not division politics, not demagoguery, not populism. We need knowledge. We need expert systems. We need understanding of complexities. We need to translate what we know about the environment or social inequalities into public policy so that we can produce sustainable development, where sustainable development means achieving prosperity in a socially inclusive way with environmental sustainability. And that requires a lot of knowledge. And that's where we as knowledge institutions come in. I think that it's interesting, if I could go back to the ancient Greeks for one moment, that when Plato asked what would be the best republic, what would be the ideal republic, he had the idea, of course, of the philosopher class that would govern. But what he said was that those guardians should be educated for 30 years, basically, to be cultivated in knowledge and in virtue, in moral virtue, so that they could responsibly administer the state. So his idea of the ideal state of a philosopher king was that the leaders should be filled with knowledge, filled with training, filled with moral virtue. And the notion of Plato and Aristotle was that a successful society was based on knowledge and rationality, knowledge of what to do and moral virtue to choose to do the right thing, and that this was the solution. And I think that there's a beauty to that. The idea is that we need to cultivate both our intellectual virtues and our moral virtues at a university and apply them, and to train leaders who are going to look at a problem with rationality and with practical wisdom, as the Greeks called it. They use the word phronesis in Greek, meaning to choose to do the good, to choose for the common good. Trump doesn't know anything about that. He chooses for his power, for his wealth. He doesn't choose for the common good. But the ideal of politics should be to train new leaders who choose for the common good. So this is why SDG 4.7 is so important. It says that all the world should train young people in the arts of sustainable development, including global citizenship, including knowledge of epidemics, including knowledge of climate change. And this training is our job. The idea is that SDG 4.7 also should apply not only at universities, the members of SDSN, but in primary school and in secondary school, so that we're cultivating intellectual knowledge and moral virtues all along the way. And SDSN Youth has been doing a fantastic job of promoting sustainable development education in the primary and secondary level. And I want to thank you for taking up that challenge. And I think that we should aim in Mexico, and of course in the United States, and of course everywhere, to make sure that SDG 4.7 is really honored, meaning that we have a system in which every child from primary school and every young leader being formed at the university has moral instruction and intellectual instruction in sustainable development, so that we're working towards the common good, and that we would know how to apply public health or clean energy or other technologies for the challenges that we're facing. So we are going to have a big, long period of recovery. We need to press our political leaders to stop doing harm and to start doing good. We need to create coalitions of right-thinking politicians. If it's mayors and governors, because it's not presidents, we're going to have to go that way until the presidents also do this. We need not only to stop the pandemic, but then to recover in a sustainable manner, building, for example, a clean environment, building on renewable energy. Unfortunately, both your president and my president and Bolsonaro are united in one idea also, which is that oil is the path to recovery. Your president is fixated on Pemex in an era where we don't need more oil, we need more sunshine. And Mexico's got lots of wonderful sunshine. Sonora, you could power the whole US, all of North America, from Mexico's sunshine. But the president's completely focused on Pemex. Well, it's the same in the United States. Trump is a maniac for fossil fuels. I think it's a lot of corruption because these fossil fuel tycoons and billionaires pay for Trump, pay for his campaign. So I think it's basically a corrupt racket, but it's so misguided. We need to plan now together on how to build the new economy along the path of sustainable development. Thank you so much for letting me be with you. Thank you to SDSN Youth for taking up the challenge of SDG 4.7. Thank you to the great institutions of Mexican higher education, our partners in SDSN, for championing the Sustainable Development Goals. And let's work urgently with all of the politicians, the governors, the mayors, and I hope the presidents, to stop this pandemic before it completely ravages our societies. Thanks again. Thanks for letting me share these thoughts with you, and back to you.
Thank you so much, Professor Sachs, for being with us. I think that it is very important to listen from you right now. As you mentioned, what I think can say is that we are in a crossway right now, and we have a lot of decisions to make on how to move forward from this pandemic. And I believe that sustainable development is the way to go. But of course, that entails a lot of challenges and a lot of problematics. So from the registry that we had for this webinar, we recovered some of the questions that we believe were the most important, and we would like to share with you. So one of them is from Marisol Ochoa. And what she wants to know is, what can we do in areas where education online is not possible due to the lack of technology and resources during this pandemic?
One thing that we should be doing is working with the telecoms companies, for example, to try to make universal access to the digital world. I don't think there is a substitute for the digital world, not only during the pandemic when we're locked down, but also after the pandemic when we need the digital revolution in order to continue telemedicine, electronic payments, e-governance, online, distance education. So many things we're going to want to do require universal access to broadband. I like the idea that was proposed recently that we make SDG 18, which is universal, equitable access to digital technologies. I think it's a good idea, but in practical terms, we need to make that happen. We can't simply say, well, they're not covered. I think that Mexico's big digital companies and big telecoms companies have a responsibility and a capacity to ensure universal access.
Thank you so much for your answer. The next question is from Alejandra Renteria, and she wants to know how can we as students be part in the construction of a better educational system if it depends primarily on the government and the governmental institutions?
I think first that as a group, SDSN Mexico and SDSN Youth should make a very specific concrete proposal about how to put sustainable development education into the Mexican curriculum and call on me, call on the UN leadership, call on partners at UNESCO and others to champion your proposal. So I think we should take this on as a very specific initiative. I think student groups and universities can also work on the curriculum. What are the detailed things a young Mexican should know about Mexico's ecology, about its geology, about its public health, about its renewable energy resources? That would be a core of this new curriculum. And I think producing content as well as advocating the uptake are two very specific things that the network could do, and you could count on me and a lot of others to help support you on that.
Thanks, I think we'll take your word then. So the next question is from Francisco Sepúlveda, and what he wants to know is how can the COVID situation encourage deep changes in terms of education? For example, in the way we evaluate and the way we teach towards an education focused on sustainable development.
It should, of course, be a wake-up call because the risk of a pandemic was actually known. Somebody even reminded me that in my books, I had mentioned back in 2008 how pandemics would be a major concern. We weren't paying attention as a world. Our political systems certainly were not paying attention. And we have problems not exactly the same as this epidemic, but we have problems of climate change, environmental destruction, poverty, and so forth that are also urgent, that we're also not paying attention to. So we should learn from this disaster to stop only listening to the games of politics, for example, but to focus on the real need to build resilient societies and on the risks that we face, and remind our politicians that that's their job too, that we don't accept less than that, because the job is the common good, which means also guarding against major threats like this, but then use science to understand them. And there's a lot of science that tells us we're doing a lot of very dangerous things, including changing the climate.
Thank you so much also for that answer. I believe that's very interesting. And then Montserrat wants to know, how would you assess the impact of privatization of education on social inequality given this pandemic?
In general, education should be accessible for all, for sure. And certainly at the primary and the secondary level and at the pre-K level, we need quality, universal access to education. And for higher education, it's the same idea that we need to be able to have financially accessible education for all who qualify, and to have a quality education for all who qualify. And indeed, for those who go to university, affordable; for those who go to vocational school, affordable and high quality, and so on. In the United States, we don't have that. We have very high cost tuition, and then more than $1 trillion of student debts, as young people have borrowed heavily, and they will go bankrupt now because of this crisis also. Even the debt was not payable before, but after this crisis, it will be even much worse. So we do need two basic points. One, access for everybody, and second, quality. That's a public investment. This is a high return for society. I'm going to have to go now. I just realized I have an urgent call that is scheduled now. I'm sorry to leave before finishing all the questions, but I know that we're going to continue the discussion and be able to address these and do this through our continued serious work together, deep work together with SDSN. But let me, before ending, just thank you so much for hosting this marvelous session and allowing me to join it.
No, thank you very much. And just very quickly before you go, I would like to yield the word to Gemma Santana, who is a government official here in Mexico and wants to just thank you for your participation with Mexican youth.
Dear Mr. Jeffrey Sachs, it is such an honor to listen to you again. I want to thank you on behalf of the Office of the President of Mexico for accepting the invitation of SDSN Youth, Chapter Mexico, who have been a strong strategy allies for the 2030 Agenda direction in this office. We have a lot of challenges about vision of how to prepare the future. For us, it's very important you help us a lot to push our national strategy of 2030 Agenda in Mexico. We have right now the direction, and we need a lot of allies to push this with different politics. We are inside, but we are part of 2030 Agenda much than ever. Thank you. Thank you so much.
Let me quickly say thank you to you and continue to count on me for everything I can do. But please, Mexico, take care from this pandemic first. It is very serious. It will not go away on its own. And people are very vulnerable, and I'm very, very worried. So please also let Mr. President know we need to fight this with every force we have, because it will disrupt Mexico terribly if it gets completely out of control. And I'm available at any moment to try to help on any strategic direction on that.
Thank you so much. Really,
Great.
Thank you so much. Bye-bye.
And thank you to all of our participants as well for joining us from different parts of the world and listening to this very important message. From SDSN Youth Mexico, we thank you all and we hope to see you soon again.
Congratulations, SDSN.